Hey everyone! Tonight we're descending into something a little grimmer, a time of plagues, punishments, and porridge you wouldn't feed your worst enemy. We're cracking open the real Middle Ages. Forget everything the movies showed you. This wasn't swords and nobility. This was survival. And spoiler, most of you wouldn't last a single sunrise. Before we jump in, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you actually appreciate raw, unfiltered truth. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Always wild to see how far this audience stretches. Alright, dim the lights, maybe fire up a fan for that subtle hum, and let's roll into this. Congrats, you've just woken up in the year 1325. The upside? You're not dead. The downside? Neither are the fleas. You're lying on a half-rotten straw mattress filled with insects and hay that still reeks of the livestock barn it came from. No memory foam. No pillow. No crisp cotton sheets. Just a scratchy wool blanket that hasn't seen water since last winter and now weighs as much as a small boar from layers of grime. You blink as a distant bell tolls, your medieval alarm clock, if torture had a sound. Your home is a single-room wooden shack. No windows. No privacy. Just an open-concept space where you, your family, the goats, and a thriving insect colony coexist in holy matrimony. The smell? It's a medieval cocktail of sour ale, human musk, damp livestock, and a sharp undertone of mildew that feels personal. No candles, those haven't been invented. And even if they had, they'd just melt into the dirt. You stretch and immediately regret it. The air's ice cold, your joints throb, and at the ripe age of 22, you're practically geriatric. Your spine creaks like an old barn door, and your knees sound like a peasant stirring gravel in a wooden bucket. Climbing out of bed is a full-contact sport. The floor is either soaked from the roof dripping rain or crusted with chicken droppings. Either way, your bare feet are now officially part of the local ecosystem. And privacy? Non-existent. Your entire family, plus a mysteriously permanent cousin named Haldrick, is crammed into this hut. No curtains, no doors, no alone time. Just a nonstop symphony of coughing, snoring, and farting. Welcome to mourning in the forgotten corners of medieval Germany. You are never alone, because parasites, rodents, and 8 other souls are in this with you. And that's just the beginning. Now comes the moment we all dread. Nature calls. And trust me, it's not whispering. It's screaming. Modern bathrooms? A fever dream. In the 14th century, relieving yourself was a grim exercise in humility, community, and physical risk. If you're a peasant, and your toilet is likely a wooden bucket behind the hut, currently overflowing because old Bert ate spoiled parsnips again. The stench is biblical. You clench your jaw, do your business, and then the real horror begins, disposing of it. You fling it into the street while yelling Gardes low. Old French for look out below. But no one ever moves fast enough. Medieval towns were rivers of rot. Open sewers running with human waste, animal droppings, and questionable fluids you'd rather not analyze. If your village had public latrines, you'd sit shoulder to shoulder with fellow sufferers in a drafty outhouse where privacy was a sick joke. Don't even think about toilet paper. Most folks wiped with straw, moss, rags, or their own shame. The lucky ones used wool scraps. Sometimes, nothing at all. Now you know why nobody shook hands. Think it's better in a castle? Marginally. You might have a garderobe, a hole in the stone wall dumping directly into the moat. Great until enemy soldiers decide to crawl in through it. Yes, that happened. Toileting, medieval style, was a test of endurance. Cold, exposed, and always just one slippery misstep from diving face first into humanity's darkest exports. And no, you haven't brushed your teeth yet. We'll get there. You survived the latrine lottery. Congrats. Ready for breakfast? Don't be. This is medieval Bohemia. Nothing about the morning meal is remotely comforting. No eggs. No espresso. No Instagrammable avocado toast. You squat by the fire and stare into a wooden bowl filled with sadness. It's called pottage, a gloppy, unidentifiable stew made from whatever's lying around. Grains, turnips, old beans, cooked in the same pot for weeks. Fresh ingredients? Just layered over whatever's already rotting at the bottom. And bread? More like a brick. Hard enough to fend off wolves. Made of rye or barley, bulked out with acorn powder or sawdust. This loaf does not love you. You don't cut it, you bargain with it. Thirsty? Too bad. There's no clean water. You're drinking ale. At 6 a.m. Yes, children too. Because the stream is full of parasites, and weak beer is the only thing that won't kill you instantly. Want meat? Keep dreaming. That's reserved for Sunday feasts, if your Lord isn't feeling stingy. Fruit? Only when it's in season, and only if it hasn't fermented into alcohol. Spices? Forget it. Pepper is a luxury. Salt is locked away. So you chew your gritty bread, gulp your morning beer, and pray last night's rat didn't sample your pottage first. Breakfast doesn't fuel you, it humbles you. And now that you're weak, cold, and emotionally wounded, it's time to get dressed. Not that it'll help. You own exactly one outfit. A rough tunic made from coarse wool or scratchy linen. No fashion seasons. Just a daily battle with itchy seams, questionable stitching, and fungal infections. Underwear? Optional. If you're lucky, there's an inner layer. If not, it's you, your bare parts, and the brutal embrace of unwashed fabric. Medieval style wasn't about looking good. It was about surviving the garment long enough to outlive it. There's no washing machine, no soap, and absolutely no trace of a dry cleaner anywhere in 14th century Valdenrake. So your clothes? They're less worn and more absorbing the misery of the world. Stained, stiff, and smelling like a compost heap left fermenting behind a pig barn. Even if you wanted to clean them, good luck. First, you'd have to drag buckets of water from a half-frozen stream or cranky village well, build a fire, boil the water, then scrub your single tunic with ashes or lye from the fire pit. After that, you'd hang it out under the sun, assuming the sun decides to show up that week, which it rarely does. Now, let's talk footwear. If you're lucky, you might own a pair of crude leather wraps, barely stitched, and about as supportive as a pancake. Most folks just go barefoot. Through filth, through dung, through what I like to call medieval landmines, shards, parasites, and mystery mud puddles brimming with the plague. Translation? Your skin is at war. You itch like it's your full-time job. Fleas, lice, bed bugs, they all live on you tax-free. Doesn't matter if you're a farmer, friar, or minor noble. Everyone is a walking buffet. Kids, clergy, and even the holy monks are just as infested. You'll be scratching your ribs with a chicken bone while chatting with Father Emile, and he won't even flinch. Your skin is raw. Your scalp is a battleground. Got a rash? Deal with it. No ointment, no diagnosis, just suffering. Maybe it's eczema, maybe it's scabies, maybe it's divine punishment. Doesn't matter. That rash is now your coworker, roommate, and life partner for the next 6 months. Dressed in wool misery and crawling with life. You're finally ready to step outside and greet the day. And just in time, because it's about to get worse. So you're covered in filth and wrapped in fibers from hell. Now give the world your best smile. Oh wait, you don't smile. Not because you're moody, but because your teeth look like they lost a fist fight with a hammer. Toothbrush? Doesn't exist. Toothpaste? Fantasy. Floss? You wish. The concept of oral hygiene is about as foreign as time travel. Some folks chew on birch twigs or swish sour wine, but overall, your teeth are a lost cause. By age 25, your mouth resembles an archaeological dig site. Cavities? Constant. Gums? Swollen. Those dark splotches? Not leftovers, it's active decay. You've got more rot in your mouth than a medieval cabbage cellar. Sugar isn't even common yet, but it's starting to show up at noble tables in Würzburg and Lothringen. Imported at eye-watering prices, it goes straight into royal tarts and toothaches. If you're rich, congrats, you'll just rot faster. If you're poor, it's a slow grind. Decades of chewing gravel bread and beer-soaked mush until your molars mutiny. Toothaches aren't random. They're the medieval background music. That kind of pain that makes people pray, drink, or yank their teeth out with heated pliers. And no, that's not a metaphor. Barbers were your dentists. Yes, the guy trimming your beard is also extracting molars by candlelight using iron hooks, possibly while whistling. No anesthesia, just prayer and screaming. Infection? You're one swollen gum away from full-blown sepsis. And yes, a toothache could literally kill you. Today it's a trip to the pharmacy. Back then, it's a one-way trip to a shallow grave. Socially, things aren't much better. Halitosis is the national anthem. Everyone's breath could kill a goat. If you're single, don't worry about your smile. Worry about your pig count. People flirt with dowries, not dimples. Your mouth is a battlefield. and the battle is lost. But no time to dwell. Your real job is just beginning. Because guess what? You still have to survive. Time to work. And by work, I mean labor until you physically disintegrate. There's no office, no lunch hour, no promotion track. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work land owned by someone with a feather in their hat who wouldn't recognize you in a lineup. You wake with the sun and stop when the moon drags itself across the sky. Your tools? A splintered hoe, a bent sickle, and the desperate hope that your spine won't collapse mid-harvest. Days off. Sundays, unless it's harvest season, there's a militia raid where your toe infection starts turning black and humming. You plow fields by hand unless you're elite enough to own an ox, which you're not. You dig, sow, weed, and haul water until your back folds like a cheap chair. No one cares how tired you are. Mental health? That phrase hasn't been invented. And if you're a woman, you get to do everything. Field work, childcare, meal prep, wool spinning, animal tending, and pretending your husband's lice haven't moved into your pillow. Children start helping at 5. No school, no toys, just a broomstick and a bucket of unrealistic expectations. And let's say you're not a farmer. Maybe you're a blacksmith, a leather tanner, or a barrel maker. Doesn't matter. Your workplace is a smoke-filled hellbox, and your daily tasks include burning, cutting, scraping, or poisoning yourself. The reward? Survival. Break your hand. Too bad. Fever? Grab a weak ale and push through it. If you can't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, someone else takes your spot. No severance, just starvation. So you grit your teeth, what's left of them, and keep going. In the medieval world, a career is a slow-motion collapse in real time. And just when your back feels like it's splitting open, the sky joins the fight. Weather here isn't a climate, it's an executioner. Let's talk winter. No insulation. No heating system. No mercy. You've got gaps in your hut you can see the moon through. Your windows are just cloth flaps. The hearth fire is weak, the woodpile is low, and firewood is either too expensive or illegal to gather. Yes, really. Take the wrong twig from the wrong grove, and you could be hanged. So you wrap yourself in your damp wool tunic, huddle by dying embers, and pray for daylight. Your nose freezes. Your feet are damp and cold. Your fingers feel like medieval icicles. There's no term for frostbite, just bad luck. Summer? You'd think it's a break. It's not. Your hut becomes a kiln. No fan, no breeze, and definitely no deodorant. You sweat through your only outfit, and you can't strip layers off because public decency still applies. Too much exposed skin invites judgment, sunburns, and enough insect bites to redraw your family tree. Welcome to the medieval climate, where every season is suffering and no one's checking the forecast because they already know. It's pain. The flies are relentless. They swarm your unwashed skin, drawn to the ripe aroma of your sweat and the remnants of last week's goat stew still curdling in a cracked pot by the hearth. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear as you try to sleep, assuming you can sleep through the nightly chorus of drunk shouting, coughing, crying infants, and the occasional owl having a breakdown. Out in the fields, the sun roasts you alive. No sunscreen, no shade, unless you've crafted yourself a sad excuse for a hat out of straw and self-loathing. But here's the kicker. You still have to work. Heat stroke? They call it taking a turn. So you're either frozen stiff in your hovel wondering if your toes will see spring again, or you're sweating through your one pair of wool socks while your thighs chafe like medieval sandpaper. And through it all, some things remain constant. Your clothes still itch, your food still sucks, and your next task is already waiting. Welcome to medieval climate control. Spoiler, there is none. Feeling thirsty? Want to splash some water on your face to escape this fever dream of a life? Too bad. In 14th century Maringard, water is not your friend. It's a subtle assassin. Let's talk hydration. That bubbling brook near the village looks like something out of a fantasy film. Clear, fresh, sparkling. Don't fall for it. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot. Or a dead lamb. Or both. Every gulp is a dice roll against parasites, bacteria, and every microbe the dark ages can muster. That's why folks, yes, even kids, drank beer. Not for fun, for survival. Brewing boiled the water, killing most of what wanted to kill you. Wine? Sure, if you're rich or indifferent to functioning before lunch. Bathing? Theoretically, yes. Realistically, not a chance. See, The prevailing wisdom back then was that washing opened your pores and let the plague march right in. The solution? Don't wash. Ever. Let the filth cake and form a spiritual armor of stink. Communal bathhouses existed, but most became dens of scandal, gossip, and scandalous extracurriculars. So naturally, the church cracked down. If you still wanted to clean yourself, it became a full-scale operation. Fetch water from a bug-infested well, boil it over a fire, pour it into a wooden tub that leaks like your roof, then hope Cousin Alric didn't use it before, or worse, after you. Rain barrels weren't better. Birds bathe in them. Bugs breed in them. Moss grows freely. So whether it's going in your mouth, on your body, or into your stew, water is less a life source and more an act of faith. One bad sip, and you're curled up on a straw mat clutching your gut, whispering regrets to a God who's not answering. So next time you sip clean tap water, raise your glass to your ancestors. They hydrated on hope and weak beer. And let's say the water didn't kill you. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a jagged rock of shame. Either way, you're sick. You need a doctor. Bad news. You live in medieval Europa, where medicine is basically ritualized suffering backed by bad Latin. Let's start with the diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, fever, rash, toothache, gangrene, is blamed on your humors. That's right, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Your body's basically a haunted stew that needs balancing. Got a fever? Too much blood. Solution? Let's bleed you. Into a bowl. With a dull knife or a mildly enthusiastic leech. Barbers were the surgeons of the day. So yes, you'd go in for a trim and leave with less blood and more trauma. Feeling sad? Clearly excess black bile. Cure? Laxatives. Herbal vomit. And maybe a priest casually measuring you for a coffin. Break a bone. You're out of luck. Surgery means a blade fresh from last week's sheep autopsy and the soothing warmth of a fire-heated poker. Not for sterilization, just for vibes. No anesthesia. No antibiotics. Germ theory hasn't even been born yet. People believe illness comes from bad air, or worse, from you displeasing God. Stomach ache? Must have been your sinful thoughts. Cue the confessional, between bouts of vomiting. If things go south, expect more leeches, maybe a roasted beetle, and a monk giving last rites while eyeing your boots. Because once it gets bad, the only cure left is death. And if you miraculously survive, everyone thanks divine mercy. The barber takes the credit. The leech gets promoted. Welcome to medieval medicine. Less about healing, more about surviving the healer. After a day of sweating, scratching, and nearly dying from basic biology, it's finally time to eat. You limp back to your hovel, stomach rumbling, dreaming of a hot, hearty meal. But here's the bad news. Your food wants you dead. First, preservation doesn't exist. No fridges, no freezers, just salt, smoke, or praying the cold keeps the rot at bay. Meat? If you're lucky enough to have it, it's been hanging for days, fly-covered, half-pickled in questionable brine, and possibly chewed on by something still living. Bread is the peasant's staple, but during bad harvests, it's padded with bark, dirt, or clay. And if it's rice season, congrats. You're ingesting ergot, a fungus that causes hallucinations, seizures, and sometimes death. Basically LSD, but with more screaming. Vegetables. Only in season. And guess what's always in season? Turnips. Mashed turnips. Boiled turnips. Turnip surprise. Your ancestors probably were turnips. Fruit appears in autumn, rots by winter, and sugar, if you've ever seen it, is hoarded by the wealthy like edible gold. Dairy? A gamble. Milk turns sour in hours. Butter and cheese might survive longer, but they're bacterial minefields. But you eat them anyway, because it's that or gnawing your boot. Spices? Huh. Pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, they're worth more than your hot. Your seasoning? Salt, if you're lucky, and tears. Every meal tastes like wet sackcloth and regret. And food isn't just dangerous, it's political. Game animals. Property of the Lord. Catch a rabbit for dinner? That's poaching. Punishment. Fine, jail, or public execution. Yes, that stew could cost you your life. So you hunch over your wooden bowl of gray soup, flicking weevils aside, and take another bite of risk. Because in this world, food doesn't restore you. It tests your will to live. Evening falls. You've labored, suffered, and chewed through despair. You'd think the day is done. But no, now it's time to repent. Because in medieval Valeshire, God is always watching. And so is Father Bernhard, and your nosy neighbor Helga, who will absolutely report you if you skip Mass. Religion isn't just a part of life, it is life. The church owns your calendar, your education, if you're literate, your laws, your marriage, your birth, your death. Think of it as your spiritual landlord, and you're always behind on rent. Prayer bells ring morning, noon, and night, not for ambience, but as mandatory reminders. Miss a prayer? Sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Double sin. Think impure thoughts? Triple sin, plus a starring role in Hell's sequel. Hell isn't vague either. The clergy describe it in detail. Lakes of fire, rivers of blood, demons wielding pitchforks like concert batons. Can't read the Bible? Doesn't matter. It's in Latin. Only monks and nobles can decode it. So if the priest says your wheat failed because you skipped morning prayer, you believe him, and you bow harder. Tithes are non-negotiable. 10% of everything. Got wheat? Give some. Got chickens? Hand over eggs. Got nothing? Then congratulations, you're broke and spiritually bankrupt. The church sees all, and if you're not in line, you're on the blacklist. So you pray, you give, you obey. Because in the Middle Ages, there are 3 certainties: death, taxes, and God's judgment delivered on a Sunday morning by a priest with bad breath. Holidays? More like holy obligations. Dozens of them. And while they technically offer a break from back-breaking labor, don't expect merriment. These are not festive escapes. They're scheduled reminders of your unworthiness. Mass attendance, fasting, confession, and renouncing joy are mandatory. Joy, after all, is viewed as spiritual weakness. Question the church? That's a death wish. Heretics are torched. Witches are drowned. Blasphemers are whipped, and skeptics are corrected, publicly, painfully, and without delay. So you go through the motions. You kneel. You chant. You beg for salvation after a life soaked in sweat, sorrow, and animal waste, hoping that maybe, the priest who decides your fate is in a forgiving mood. Because God might be merciful, but his middleman? Not so much. And if you thought being a peasant in old Ardennes was bleak, try doing it as a woman. All the dirt, disease, and danger, but now add childbirth, silence, and zero autonomy. Being born female in the Middle Ages is like playing the game on nightmare mode, with no weapons, no map, and a target on your back. From birth, your path is set in iron. Marry early, bear children, obey without question, die tired. Education? Almost non-existent. Unless you're born into nobility and lucky enough to be shipped to a convent, your intellectual development ends somewhere between churning butter and sewing sleeves. Marriage comes early, like too early. 12, betrothed. 14, pregnant. Love doesn't matter. Land, livestock, and family alliances do. Your consent isn't required. Once wed, you're basically property. Your purpose: produce sons, feed the house, work the fields, and never, ever complain. Because complaining gets you labeled a nuisance, or worse, a witch. And that title comes with an express ticket to burning or drowning, depending on local trends. Childbirth is its own form of Russian roulette. No medical care, no pain relief, no clean instruments. Midwives do what they can, but even a slight complication can mean death for both mother and child. Some survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive 2. And once the baby's born, your workload doubles. Now you're breastfeeding a colicky newborn while stoking the fire, milking the goat, and keeping your husband's lice on his side of the bed. Unmarried? You're suspicious. Widowed? You're vulnerable. Opinionated? You're dangerous. Herbal knowledge, sharp tongue, or a side eye during a thunderstorm. That's all it takes to get tied to a post. Even in convents, where women sought refuge, silence and submission were enforced. Speak only with permission. Move only when allowed. Your holiness? Always ranked below a man's. In this world, women aren't expected to survive. They're expected to endure, gracefully, silently, and while smiling through bloodied teeth. By now you've survived hunger, disease, back-breaking work, and social control. But just when you think your suffering has peaked, here comes violence. Loud, brutal, and as normal as breakfast. The Middle Ages were not peaceful. Law and order, if it existed at all, meant hope the local baron isn't in a mood. Violence lived everywhere, in homes, on roads, in churches, at the bakery. Crime was constant. Punishment, vicious and theatrical. Steal bread? Say goodbye to your hand. Lie. Get your tongue pierced. Gossip too much. Here comes the scold's bridle. A metal cage clamped on your face with a bar in your mouth to shut you up. Accused of theft, heresy, or witchcraft. Time for your trial. Trial by ordeal, to be precise. One version: plunge your hand into boiling water to grab a stone. If it heals clean in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, oops, you're guilty. Another version: get thrown into a river. Sink. Innocent, but dead. Float. Guilty. Either way, you lose. Justice in medieval Caerwyn was performance art, and the crowd loved it. Executions were social events. People brought bread and cheese to watch someone hang, burn, or get beheaded. It was family entertainment. Domestic violence? Normal. Husbands were expected to discipline wives and children. Street fights broke out over glances. You could get stomped just for walking too close to a knight's horse. And war? Always looming. Whether over religion, borders, or someone's wounded pride, someone was always suiting up to die for a flag or a grudge. Violence wasn't the exception. It was the system. Everyone knew death was close. Everyone lived like they might not make it to next week. That's why I stayed down, mouth stayed shut, and no one trusted a man holding a stick. At this point, if you've made it through fleas, fire, famine, and fanaticism, you still lose. Because here comes the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early, anonymous death. Make it past 40? Congratulations. You're a local legend. They call you the Elder, which sounds nice until you realize it just means the one who didn't die yet. Average life expectancy? Somewhere between 30 and 40, dragged down by the tidal wave of infant deaths. Nearly half of all children didn't make it past age 5. Disease, hunger, or a cold winter did the job. If you survived childhood, adulthood was no reward. Work began before your bones finished forming, and by 25 your body was already falling apart. Missing teeth? Normal. Missing a finger? Not unusual. Missing all sense of hope? Understandable. For women, childbirth was one of the leading causes of death. No sterile rooms, no trained doctors, just a bucket of hot water, whispered prayers, and the midwife's shaking hands. For men, life came with a different set of death traps: farming accidents, infected cuts, pub brawls, collapsing barns, or crusades you didn't sign up for. Even a trip to the market could end in a back alley stabbing or a spontaneous tax execution. Then there was plague, turning cities into graveyards overnight. Or famine, which stretched on for months, thinning out whole villages until nothing moved but rats. Or maybe it's moldy bread laced with a psychedelic fungus that sends you screaming into the afterlife. If you were lucky, you got a burial, usually shallow, quick, and shared. No embalming, no casket, just a hole, a grunt from the gravedigger, and a thin layer of dirt to keep the dogs off your ribs. The churchyard had limited space, so the dead made room by rotting fast. In the Middle Ages, life wasn't a journey. It was a countdown. No retirement, no farewell tour. You just stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's wrap up your medieval day. You woke up in filth, peed in a bucket, scraped your tongue with prayer, almost fainted from hunger, worked until your knees cracked, got accused of witchcraft for owning a squirrel, and then ate a hallucinogenic turnip stew while praying your neighbors don't stab you over it. Still dreaming of being a knight? Think again. The shining armor? A myth. The princess in a tower? An exaggeration. The noble feast? Mostly rats, stew, and syphilis. The medieval world wasn't romantic. It was savage, punishing, and unjust. Fairy tales cleaned it up. History wrote it down. But now, you've lived it. Hierarchy ruled everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congratulations, you simply had better odds of survival. But even then, you were just one bad bowl of soup away from dysentery and a hasty burial. Nobles weren't immune to misery either. Castles? Giant, drafty stone refrigerators crawling with fleas, choked with smoke, and suffocating under the weight of politically arranged marriages. You might have worn a fur cloak and sipped wine from a goblet, but you also faced a 50% chance of dying in a skirmish or from an infected splinter. So no, the so-called simpler times weren't simple. They were brutal. Everything took longer. Everything hurt more. Childbirth, chewing, even just staying warm came with consequences. Life wasn't leisure, it was survival. And if, by some miracle, You managed a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better. Tough luck. There was no social mobility, no medicine, and definitely no internet to search. What's this weird rash? You were born, suffered, worked, and died within a 10-mile radius. But here's the twist. Through all that darkness, people still laughed. They sang, they told stories, they fell in love. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in misery, they carved out moments of light. So tonight, when you slip into a clean bed, surrounded by indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, maybe whisper a quiet thank you. To the modern world, yes. But also to the ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism so you wouldn't have to. Long before she became Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, reformer, visionary, she was just Sophie. Born Sophie Frederica Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she came from a modest German duchy with little power. But Sophie had something titles couldn't grant: razor-sharp intelligence, magnetic charm, and an unshakable hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was cold and calculated. Her mother, Johanna, was a social climber obsessed with status. Her father, a distant Prussian officer, was barely present. So Sophie learned early how to walk the knife's edge between obedience and cunning. She devoured books, mastered languages, and sharpened her instincts, skills that would soon become weapons in one of Europe's most dangerous courts. When Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrovna began hunting for a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter was German-born, and Elizabeth wanted someone foreign, someone pliable. Sophie fit perfectly: noble blood, Lutheran background, which she'd be forced to shed, and a reputation for humility and grace. At just 14, Sophie was summoned to the frozen capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, wrapped in thin German fabrics and a diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a pawn, but Sophie had her own game in mind. To become palatable to Russian society, she converted to Orthodoxy, publicly, symbolically, and permanently, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. It wasn't just a ritual, it was a line in the sand. She burned the bridge behind her. No going back. No second chances. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in a fur-trimmed coat could have foreseen what was coming next: betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. But Sophie did. From the moment she entered that court, she stopped being a pawn and began planning how to become a queen. Her marriage to Grand Duke Peter was never a love story. It was a trap. Peter, the heir to Russia, was no Prince Charming. He was awkward, childish, and obsessed with toy soldiers. He preferred play-acting war in his chambers over governing, or even acknowledging his new wife. Some say he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and resented the Russian court. Catherine, on the other hand, embraced Russia with all she had. She learned the language, studied its history, and immersed herself in Orthodox rituals. She wanted to belong. Peter wanted to flee. This wasn't just a personal mismatch, it was political. The Russian court was a viper's nest: gossip, suspicion, backstabbing. Empress Elizabeth still ruled, but her health was fading. Everyone was preparing for a power shift. Catherine was watched constantly, her letters intercepted, her conversations monitored, her every move judged. She couldn't trust Peter, not her mother, not even her servants. But Catherine was far from naive. She learned to play the long game. Quietly, methodically, she cultivated allies in the shadows. She charmed generals, befriended scholars, and became known for grace and restraint, a sharp contrast to her husband's tantrums and public contempt for Russian culture. Behind closed doors, she devoured the works of Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others saw a decorative consort, Catherine was sketching out a new vision for herself and for Russia, a nation built on education, strength, and reason. But one problem remained. As long as Peter lived, she was stuck, trapped in limbo, married to a man unfit to rule. So she waited. She watched. And she planned. In 1762, her moment came. Empress Elizabeth died. Peter, now Tsar Peter III, ascended and instantly began unraveling. In mere months, he alienated the church, insulted the nobility, and enraged the military. He praised Prussia, Russia's sworn enemy. He reversed reforms, humiliated priests, and spoke openly about divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court turned icy. The army grumbled. Even the public grew wary of their foreign-sounding, erratic ruler. And Catherine? She made her move. In July, with Peter at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup. Backed by loyal military leaders, including her lover, Grigory Orlov, and his powerful brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia and was declared Empress Catherine II. The imperial guard swore allegiance. The city fell behind her. Peter, caught off guard and friendless, surrendered within days. Days later, he was dead, officially from hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, assassinated. Catherine had done the impossible, not by birth, not by marriage, but by wit, strategy, and relentless ambition. She was no longer the pawn. She was the queen. A foreign-born woman with no blood claim to the Romanov dynasty had taken the Russian throne, without a single drop of blood spilled. But the true battle was only beginning. Now she had to transform her daring coup into a lasting reign. Would Russia accept her? Would the nobles fall in line? Could she hold the empire together without suffering the same fate as her husband? Catherine understood one unshakable truth. Power won by intrigue could be lost just as easily. To secure her place, she couldn't just rule as a conspirator. She had to evolve into a visionary. Thus began her metamorphosis, from a careful tactician to a reforming empress. One who would redraw borders, embrace the Enlightenment, and redefine what it meant to be a woman in power. Once Catherine had the crown, she could have ruled quietly, basking in her triumph. But she wanted more, much more. She didn't just want to sit on a throne. She wanted to transform Russia at its core, intellectually, culturally, and ideologically. Where Peter had idolized Frederick the Great and clung to toy soldiers, Catherine admired Voltaire, Diderot, and the radical thinkers of the Enlightenment. She believed in reason, in progress, in education, and in the monarch not as a tyrant, but as a servant of the people, even if she still ruled with absolute authority. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy, she embodied it. She corresponded with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him even while defending her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court, later purchasing his entire library to support him. Behind closed doors, she pored over legal texts, debated reforms, and shaped policy with a reformist mind and a stateswoman's precision. Her early reign focused on law. In 1767, she launched the Legislative Commission, an ambitious effort to rewrite Russia's legal code. Her own nakaz, or instruction, was more than a legal guide. It was a disguised manifesto. It argued for equality before the law, condemned torture, and demanded rulers serve the common good. For 18th century Russia, it was revolutionary. But Enlightenment ideals faced a brutal reality. Russia remained a feudal, conservative empire, a land where nobles saw serfs not as people, but property. Catherine understood this deeply. So, while she spoke of reform, she acted with caution. She abolished some forms of torture. She expanded access to secular education. She built schools and libraries. But she also strengthened noble control over serfs to keep their loyalty. This was Catherine's constant high-wire act, philosopher queen in public, pragmatist empress in private. She balanced ideology with survival, Enlightenment dreams with Russian grit. Her goal was never to make Russia European. It was to make Russia modern, on her terms. And that meant reform, yes, but always with an iron hand and a velvet glove. Catherine wasn't content to only reform from within. She wanted to expand outward, turning Russia into an empire that Europe would fear, admire, and envy. Where Peter the Great opened a window to the west, Catherine bulldozed the walls. Under her reign, Russia's borders stretched wider than ever. Her wars weren't mere defense, they were statements. Among the most pivotal, the long campaigns against the Ottoman Empire in the 1760s and 70s. To Catherine, these battles weren't just about land, they were about purpose. She cast herself as the protector of Orthodox Christians living under Muslim rule, a liberator of Eastern Europe. Victories came under the leadership of generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin. Crimea, the Black Sea coast, and access to warm water ports, lifelong goals of Russian Tsars, were finally realized. These weren't just territorial wins. They were symbols, messages to the world. Russia was no longer Europe's backward cousin. It was a power to be reckoned with. She looked westward too. Through shrewd diplomacy and ruthless pragmatism, Catherine participated in the partitions of Poland, alongside Austria and Prussia. By 1795, Poland was wiped off the map. In its place, Russia inherited vast territories and millions of new subjects. But Catherine didn't conquer only with guns. She colonized with vision. She built cities, expanded trade routes, welcomed German settlers to cultivate Russian soil. Her empire became a vast mosaic, from the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched Black Sea. Critics called her power-hungry, imperialistic. But to Catherine, expansion wasn't vanity, it was destiny. Great rulers, she believed, were measured not just by ideals, but by their maps. She didn't just want to govern Russia. She wanted to remake it, civilized, feared, admired, and loyal only to her. Yet for all her power and intellect, Catherine the Great was equally famous for what happened behind palace walls. And not all of it involved libraries or court documents. Her private life drew endless fascination. She had lovers, many of them, carefully chosen, often decades younger, strikingly handsome, and politically astute. She made no secret of them. In fact, she rewarded them with titles, estates, pensions, if they behaved. If they didn't, they were dismissed quietly and generously. Among them, one man stood apart, Grigory Potemkin, brilliant, audacious, and possibly her secret husband. Their relationship blurred every boundary: romance, politics, power. Together, they transformed southern Russia, led military campaigns, and shaped colonization efforts. Potemkin wasn't just a lover. He was a co-ruler in all but name. But Europe couldn't look past the scandal. Pamphlets and whispers painted her as lustful, deranged, even monstrous. After her death, the lies grew darker. The infamous tale involving a horse, a grotesque and utterly false smear, was born not from fact, but from fear. Fear of a woman who ruled on her own terms. In a world where female power was meant to be saintly, tragic, or hidden, Catherine was none of those things. She was unapologetic. She lived. She loved. She governed. And she did it all without asking permission. Ironically, the woman mocked as immoral was deeply philosophical about love and power. She believed in pleasure. She believed relationships didn't have to compromise responsibility. She separated emotion from governance, a feat many male rulers never mastered. In truth, her affairs were often strategic. She surrounded herself with loyalty, competence, and discretion. And when those men outlived their usefulness, she released them with a smile and a golden handshake. Catherine's love life never weakened her rule. It was part of it. A calculated fusion of passion and power that made her unforgettable, envied, and feared. For all her charisma and control, her reign was not without peril. And in 1773, that peril arrived not from a foreign army, but from within. It wore a beard and rode in from the steppes, calling itself Emelian Pugachev. He was no ordinary rebel. Pugachev claimed to be none other than Peter III, Catherine's long-dead husband. According to him, he had survived the coup and returned to reclaim his rightful throne from the German usurper. The claim was laughable. Peter was dead. But in a Russia where the lower classes were crushed under feudal oppression, the truth was irrelevant. What mattered was hope. Pugachev promised land, lower taxes, freedom from serfdom. His words spread like wildfire across the Volga River basin. Among the Cossacks, peasants, and old believers, his promises weren't lies. They were salvation. The Pugachev rebellion became the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Towns fell. Fortresses were seized. Nobles were slaughtered. For a brief, terrifying moment, the empire itself teetered on the edge. Catherine was shaken. This wasn't a conflict she could solve with diplomacy or foreign armies. This was her people, rising against her rule. But she didn't flinch. She responded with force. Professional troops were dispatched. Pugachev's army was crushed in 1774. He was captured, caged, paraded through the streets of Moscow, and publicly beheaded, a clear message to anyone who dared dream of rebellion. In the aftermath, Catherine doubled down on control. The dream of liberating the serfs, so present in her earlier ideals, vanished into silence. She leaned harder on the nobility, rewarding them with even greater control over their serfs in exchange for loyalty. It was a turning point. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now prioritized order over ideals. Reform became cautious. Surveillance increased. Rebellion, even whispered, was crushed before it could breathe. Pugachev lost his head, but left behind a warning. Power built on inequality is never safe. By the time Catherine neared the end of her life, she had ruled for over 3 decades, longer than any woman in Russian history. From the moment she seized the throne, she shattered expectations. She reshaped her empire, and she redefined what it meant to be a woman in power. Under her rule, Russia became a European powerhouse. The empire expanded by more than 200,000 square miles. Crimea, parts of Poland, the Black Sea coast. These weren't just military wins. They were geopolitical masterstrokes, securing trade, warm water ports, and imperial dominance. But Catherine's legacy wasn't just mapped in borders. She left a cultural mark. She helped establish the Hermitage Museum, built one of Europe's greatest art collections, and turned her court into a center of Enlightenment thinking. She introduced education reforms, founded schools for girls, and championed the spread of printing. She even publicly received a smallpox inoculation, a bold embrace of science in a superstitious age. Yet, her reign remained filled with contradictions. She believed in Enlightenment principles, but never freed the serfs. In fact, she expanded serfdom deeper into new territories. Her reforms, while impressive, were mostly top-down, designed to modernize the state without altering its rigid social foundations. Still, Catherine brought stability, ambition, and vision. She knew power wasn't inherited. It had to be seized, shaped, and defended. She ruled not by divine right, but through intellect, calculation, and relentless will. She was called many things: manipulator, tyrant, seductress, reformer. But above all, she was effective. When she died in 1796, Russia was wealthier, larger, and stronger than it had been in centuries. She left a throne secure, an empire transformed, and a legend that would echo long after her burial. Catherine the Great didn't just reign, she ruled. With strategy, intellect, and an unapologetic grip on power, she became more than an empress. She became a myth. And yet, behind the imperial portraits and polished statecraft stood a woman navigating a man's world and reshaping it in her image. She was never born to rule. She wasn't even born Russian. She seized power in a coup, led an empire that resented a woman's rule, and outlasted them all. Catherine was never ornamental. She was tireless. She read constantly, wrote endlessly, worked relentlessly. Her days were filled with reports, edits, correspondence, and court intrigues. She didn't just sit on the throne. She worked it like a general commanding the front lines. But she was also profoundly alone. Surrounded by courtiers, lovers, and intellectuals, she still confided in her memoirs how few she truly trusted. Her son Paul, whom she kept at a distance, grew into a man she feared, afraid he would undo her legacy. Her bond with Grigory Potemkin, perhaps the great love of her life, faded into deep friendship. His death in 1791 left a wound that never fully healed. Catherine was a master of narrative. She styled herself as the mother of Russia, the enlightened empress, the warrior queen, and patron of the arts. But beneath the carefully crafted image was a woman who had survived betrayal, rebellion, slander, and isolation, and never stopped moving forward. When she died, the title, the Great, had already been whispered around her name. It wasn't because she was perfect, or kind, or universally beloved. It was because she took power and held it on her own terms, in a world that said she wasn't supposed to have any at all. She didn't just wear the crown. She rewrote what it meant to deserve one. And yet, there was no name, no glyph carved into stone, no inscription etched into the walls. One of the richest female burials in all of Mesoamerica, and still an utter enigma. Who was she? Why was she buried in blood-red dust? Was she a queen? A priestess? Perhaps even the wife of Palenque's greatest king? The archaeologists called her the Red Queen, and the name stuck. But the truth? It remained sealed in silence. Even with modern forensics, the mystery held fast. All they could say for certain was that she had lived in the 7th century, during the golden age of Palenque. Unlike most Maya tombs, hers was untouched, hidden, purposefully isolated. Her burial wasn't just ceremonial, It was spiritual. This woman wasn't meant to be remembered through words. She was meant to be remembered through color, ritual, and mystery. What haunted the tomb wasn't her jade ornaments. It wasn't the silence. It was the dust. A suffocating, brilliant red powder, cinnabar, covered everything. The sarcophagus, the floor, the walls, her bones, her offerings. It clung like blood to stone. To the Maya, this wasn't decoration. It was revelation. Made from crushed mercury sulfide, cinnabar was one of the most sacred and toxic substances in the ancient world. Its colors symbolized blood, rebirth, sacrifice, and the bridge between human life and the divine. Red was more than pigment. It was a portal. The hue of sunrise, the pulse of maize, the soul's ascent. And to bathe a corpse in cinnabar was no casual rite. It was a ritual of transformation. In Maya cosmology, death was not the end, but a passage into a new cosmic realm. The Red Queen wasn't simply buried. She was being prepared for deification. Yet this transformation came at a cost. Cinnabar is deadly. Prolonged exposure leads to tremors, hallucinations, even death. The Maya may not have known the chemistry, but they understood its power. Volatile, potent, divine. To cover her in it was to declare, this woman was not mortal. In Palenque, few received such a burial. One other? Kinich Janab Pakal, Pakal the Great, Palenque's most legendary ruler. His tomb, only feet away, was also saturated in cinnabar. The parallels ignited a theory. Was the Red Queen his wife? His mother? A ruler in her own right? There were clues. Her skull had been carefully placed on a layer of jaguar skin, a sacred symbol of royalty and spiritual power. Around her lay bone needles, obsidian blades, and miniature jade figurines, objects not of vanity, but of ritual and rank. Some may have been used in ceremonies during her life, others placed to accompany her through death. And then there was the mask, a mosaic death mask, delicately placed over her face. Unlike the gold funerary masks of Egypt, this one was composed of tiny jade tiles, fitted to mimic the contours of her skull. It wasn't crafted to impress. It was made to protect the soul, to preserve identity, to present her to the gods as divine. Her tomb held no excess, no chariots, no treasure hoards, just deliberate offerings, each with spiritual gravity. Jade necklaces, still radiant after 1,300 years, adorned her chest, wrists, and ears. For the Maya, jade wasn't just beautiful, it was sacred, a symbol of eternal life, of breath, of maize, the essence of creation. Only the elite were buried in it. For the Red Queen, it covered her like armor. Bone pins, obsidian tools, shell ornaments, each piece a clue, each artifact a whisper from the past. One bone pin bore an engraving, faint, deliberate, a mark of identity now lost. At her feet, ceramic vessels remained sealed, likely once filled with offerings, food, drink, incense, provisions for the journey through Xibalba, the Maya underworld, a realm of shadows, challenges, and gods. To modern eyes, the tomb feels intimate, not grand. It wasn't about wealth. It was a map for the soul, a quiet declaration. This woman mattered. For all its richness, her burial leaves behind a haunting void. No name, no voice, only power, color, and myth. From the moment her tomb was opened in 1994, archaeologists have tried to decode her identity. The most compelling theory? That she was Tiziakbu Ajah, the wife of Pakal the Great. Born into nobility, Tiziakbu married into Palenque's ruling dynasty. She bore sons who held elite status and played ceremonial roles of deep importance. If anyone deserved such a burial, it was her. The tomb's proximity to Pakal's, just a few feet away in the Temple of the Inscriptions, suggests a deliberate pairing. Husband and wife, united in death as they had been in life. And again, the cinnabar. Only two burials in Palenque used it so richly, Pakal's and hers. That was no coincidence. But the mystery deepens. DNA tests were conducted. They revealed no direct maternal link between the Red Queen and Pakal. But that didn't disprove a marital bond. Marriage doesn't require shared blood. Others have speculated she may have been Sak Kuk, Pakal's powerful mother who ruled before him. Or perhaps a priestess, a queen sister, or a royal ancestor whose name has simply eroded with time. And so she remains a mystery. Entombed in silence, cloaked in red, and surrounded by jade. A woman elevated beyond death. A sovereign whose identity may be lost, but whose power still pulses through stone. The Red Queen was not buried to be forgotten. She was buried to ascend. Still, the strongest evidence points to Tiziakbu Ajah, a queen by title, a mother of kings, and spiritual counterpart to Pakal. The absence of her name may not be an oversight. It may be intentional. In Maya cosmology, the soul did not live on through carved names or towering monuments. It endured through ritual, symbol, and the whispers of the earth. And so, the Red Queen remains suspended between legend and truth, a woman of power remembered not in stone, but in scarlet and silence. To understand the Red Queen, we must understand the world she came from, a world where Maya women, especially royal ones, wielded far more influence than history has often admitted. In Maya civilization, politics was a deeply familial affair. Royal women were never just decorative consorts. They were diplomats, priestesses, strategists, and power brokers. They led rituals, commissioned temples, and solidified dynasties. Their bloodlines were political tools, used to forge alliances, legitimize rule, and bind kingdoms together. Take Sak Kuk, the mother of Pakal the Great. When Palenque's throne was left vacant, she didn't serve as a placeholder. She ruled. As queen regent, she issued decrees, commissioned architecture, and secured her son's rise. Without her, Pakal's reign might never have begun. And she wasn't alone. Across Maya cities like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions show women leading ceremonies, negotiating diplomacy, even commanding in war. Their likenesses appear in stele and murals, wearing regal headdresses, performing sacred acts, sometimes beside kings, sometimes above them. Their names were etched in glyphs. Their deeds recorded. Until they weren't. By the time Spanish conquistadors arrived, much of that memory had been erased. Filtered through colonial eyes, Maya women were miscast as silent figures in a male-dominated world. But the stones tell a different story, one of complex gender dynamics where power was negotiated, not assumed. This context casts the Red Queen in a new light. She may not have ruled by name, but her burial, rich, sacred, and positioned beside Palenque's greatest king, reveals her as a central pillar of the royal court. Her jade mask was not an ornament. It was a symbol of identity, a divine face preserved through death. Her lineage may have been the glue that held the dynasty together. In Maya civilization, a queen was more than a consort. She was a sacred vessel, a voice in ceremony, and the living bridge between gods and kings. The Red Queen may be nameless, but she was never voiceless. She wasn't just buried with treasures, she was buried in architecture, a structure layered with cosmology, ritual, and deliberate design. Her tomb was no simple grave. It was a gateway. Her body was discovered within Temple 13, one of the smaller pyramids in the ceremonial heart of Palenque. But its proximity to Temple of the Inscriptions, where Pakal rests, is crucial. These temples weren't placed randomly. Their orientation followed astrology, myth, and legacy. Temple 13 may rise modestly, but it conceals something more intimate, a sealed crypt, untouched by looters, preserved by design. The entrance was hidden deep within, reachable only by a narrow, descending stairway, a symbolic descent into the underworld. The tomb itself is stark. Smooth limestone walls, sealed in silence for over 1,300 years. No glyphs, no murals, no grand carvings. But that absence speaks volumes. This was not a space for the living. It was a place of transformation. At the chamber's center, her sarcophagus sits like an altar, echoing Pakal's nearby coffin. While his is engraved with cosmic rebirth, hers is subdued. The focus is inward, on the body, the cinnabar, the ritual of death itself. Even the tomb's architecture carries meaning. It aligns east to west, following the sun's symbolic journey, from life to death to rebirth. The room is small, but profound, a sacred enclosure, personal and deliberate. In the Maya worldview, temples were not just buildings. They were cosmic portals, bridges between earth, sky, and underworld. To be buried inside one was to be elevated beyond mortality. The Red Queen's eternal home was not an afterthought. It was a shrine, a place where death became transformation. Her bones rest in stone, her essence in cinnabar, her legacy etched not in glyphs, but in the architecture itself. To the ancient Maya, death wasn't the end, it was a crossing, a sacred threshold into Xibalba, the mythic underworld. For someone like the Red Queen, this journey was more than spiritual. It was cosmic, political, and ceremonial. Burial rites were elaborate performances, rooted in mythology and designed to guide the soul through darkness. In Maya texts, Xibalba is no peaceful paradise. It is a labyrinth of rivers, trials, and death gods. Survival required preparation, ritual, offerings, and sacred tools. The Red Queen was wrapped in cinnabar, sealed in limestone, and surrounded by offerings, a clear mark of elite burial. But the artifacts told an even deeper story. Bone needles, obsidian blades, shell relics. These weren't decorative. They may have been used in life for auto-sacrifice, ritual bloodletting, or laid in the tomb to symbolize power and devotion. They suggest a woman who performed sacred rites or was honored through them in death. Her jade mask, pieced together with delicate care, wasn't just for show. In Maya belief, the face was the mirror of the soul, and the soul had to be recognized by the gods. The mask may have served as her spiritual identity, ensuring she would be seen and welcomed in the afterlife. The ceramic vessels surrounding her likely once held food, cacao, maize, or pulque, nourishment for the treacherous journey through Xibalba. These weren't luxuries. They were necessities. Through this burial, we glimpse a civilization that didn't see death as an end, but as a transition of power. The Red Queen wasn't buried to be forgotten. She was buried to ascend. Other items, stingray spines, shell trumpets, may have served as spiritual instruments, tools of bloodletting, calls to the gods, symbols of sacred communication. To the Maya, burial was never just a farewell. It was transformation. Death was the seed, burial, the planting, and the afterlife, rebirth. Maya kings and queens were seen not merely as rulers, but as earthly incarnations of gods. In death, they returned to that divine origin. The Red Queen, soaked in cinnabar, entombed in stone, and honored with jade and ritual, was not laid to rest. She was being reborn, not as a mortal, but as a being entwined with the sacred order of the cosmos. Her tomb wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of her legend. Just steps from her resting place lies one of the most iconic tombs in Mesoamerica, that of Kinich Janab Pakel the Great. His burial in the towering Temple of the Inscriptions is famous for its grandeur, symbolism, and cosmic artistry. But what makes the Red Queen's tomb so extraordinary is not only what was inside, but where. Her sarcophagus was hidden within Temple 13, directly adjacent to Pakel's majestic resting place. In Palenque, a city where every temple was aligned to reflect cosmic harmony, this placement was deliberate. It was a message, etched not in glyphs, but in stone. Many scholars believe the Red Queen was Tiziakbu Ajah, Pakel's queen and closest spiritual counterpart. While her tomb lacks inscriptions, the parallels between their burials are too precise to ignore. Both were wrapped in cinnabar, both entombed in pyramids, both adorned in jade, and both treated with profound reverence. Their rituals mirror each other, as if two halves of a sacred story. Pakel's sarcophagus lid famously depicts him falling into the jaws of the underworld, a tree of life cradling his descent. The Red Queen's tomb is more restrained. No carvings, no cosmic imagery, but perhaps her symbolism lies in the pairing itself. If Pakel embodied the sun, descending through night to rise again, then the Red Queen may have represented the moon, a feminine force moving on her own sacred path. Together, they reflected the Maya understanding of cosmic balance, masculine and feminine, king and queen, day and night, power and harmony. By placing her beside him, the Maya weren't just honoring a marriage, they were preserving a divine partnership. Two souls, wrapped in red, sealed in stone, no glyphs needed. Their silence speaks volumes. Though her name was lost to erosion, the Red Queen endures, not as a relic, but as one of the most powerful and enigmatic women of the ancient world. Her tomb, sealed for over 1,300 years, now whispers across time. It invites questions. It resists simple answers. She may have been a queen, a priestess, a matriarch, But whoever she was, she mattered. She wasn't buried with excess. She was buried with meaning. Every artifact, every architectural detail speaks of real power, spiritual authority, and dynastic weight. Today, the Red Queen forces us to reconsider what we think we know. She reminds us that Maya women were not silent. They led. They performed rituals. They shaped empires. While rulers like Pakal stand in the spotlight, she stands in the shadows, quiet, crimson, commanding. Her legacy is not just what she left behind. It's the conversation she ignited. Among archaeologists, historians, artists, dreamers. And perhaps that is the most extraordinary thing. Not what we know, but what we still don't. The Red Queen teaches us something fundamental. That history isn't static. It breathes. It withholds. It demands we listen carefully, not just to what is carved, but to what is missing. Her face, once hidden behind jade, now stares back at us through science, art, and imagination. She remains nameless, but not voiceless. Mysterious, but not forgotten. She may have ruled a kingdom in life, but in death, she rules something even greater. Our imagination. And now, another woman rises from history. Different time, different world, same unshakable force. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in Coyoacán, then a quiet village on the outskirts of Mexico City. Her childhood home, La Casa Azul, the Blue House, would become her sanctuary, her prison, her studio, and her final resting place. A place that held every version of her, the girl, the painter, the revolutionary. Frida was the third of 4 daughters. Her father, Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, was introspective and artistic. Her mother, Matilda Calderon, of indigenous and Spanish heritage, was devout and emotionally distant. Frida would inherit her father's eye and her mother's will. As a child, she was bold, brilliant, and brimming with questions adults were too afraid to answer. At age 6, polio left her right leg thin and weak, a difference she concealed with long skirts, but never allowed to break her spirit. While others played, she read, sketched, asked, challenged. Her illness confined her to bed, but in that stillness she found intimacy with her father, who encouraged her to stay strong, ride bikes, and sharpen her mind. Frida didn't dream of marriage. She dreamed of medicine. At 15, she entered Mexico's elite national preparatory school, one of only 35 girls admitted. She stood out immediately. For her mind, for her rebellious wit, for her politics and fire. She joined the Cachuchas, a group of radical thinkers and artists who challenged everything. Church, state, patriarchy. Frida was drawn to revolution. Long before paint touched her canvas, she was already shaping herself, with blunt honesty, sharp humor, and radical defiance. But on September 17, 1925, her life split in two. She was 18. That afternoon, Frida boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend Alejandro Gomez Arias. They laughed, teased, argued. Then, the crash. A streetcar collided with the bus, splintering it against a wall. Frida was impaled by a metal handrail, entered through her hip, exited through her pelvis. Her spine shattered, her leg mangled, her collarbone, ribs, shoulder, all broken. She was crushed, pierced, torn apart, but not ended. That day destroyed her body, but it birthed the Frida the world would come to know. The woman who turned pain into portraits, suffering into symbolism, bones into brushstrokes. She wouldn't walk away from that wreck. She would rise from it. A man draped her with a borrowed overcoat. Someone else noticed that her broken body wasn't just soaked in blood, it was glittering. A pouch of gold powder she'd been carrying had burst in the crash, dusting her with a fine, shimmering cloud. She looked, in that surreal moment, like a fallen phoenix covered in ash and stardust. Frida was rushed to the Red Cross hospital, where she would undergo countless surgeries. Her spine fractured, her leg shattered, her pelvis pierced. For months, she lay in a full-body cast, immobile, writhing in pain, isolated in uncertainty. The future she had imagined, of becoming a doctor, slipped further away with each breath. But in that stillness, something began to stir. Her father gave her brushes. Her mother built a rigged easel that could hang above her bed. A mirror was mounted to the canopy. And there, trapped in plaster and steel, Frida began to paint. First out of boredom, then out of obsession. Her first subject was the only one she could see, herself. It wasn't vanity. It was survival. The crash had splintered her body, but it had also opened a doorway into her mind, her memory, her trauma. What poured out wasn't delicate or soft. It was sharp, surreal, visceral. It was the beginning of a new language, a visual vocabulary of pain and identity. As she lay encased in a body fighting itself, Frida began to speak in images. Her paintings weren't escapism. They were confrontation. Frida didn't paint pretty flowers or polite landscapes. She painted pain. Her pain. Physical, emotional, existential. She once said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." Her early works were intimate, painted on tin or wood in the tradition of Mexican retablos, small devotional paintings meant to commemorate suffering and miracles. But Frida turned that tradition inward. Her body became the altar, her brush, the confession. She painted herself impaled by nails, like a martyr, fractured, floating, bound to a broken column, bleeding, bare, but never passive, always watching. Her pain wasn't sanitized. It was sacred, each painting a defiant act of reclamation, of her body, her trauma, her autonomy. Her art wasn't polite. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to make you look. And once you did, you couldn't look away. Frida invented a new form of storytelling, one that fused folk art, surrealism, medical illustration, Mexican symbolism, and raw emotion. Her canvases were part autopsy, part exorcism, part manifesto. By the time she could walk again, painfully, with a cane, Frida was no longer the girl who dreamed of medicine. She was an artist, and her art was like nothing the world had ever seen. In 1928, at just 21 years old and still recovering, Frida Kahlo met Diego Rivera, the most important, most devastating, most consuming figure of her personal and artistic life. He was Mexico's most famous painter, 20 years her senior, massive in stature, voice, and reputation. A titan of the muralist movement, politically radical, personally chaotic. She brought her paintings to him, interrupting his work at the Ministry of Education. "Do I have talent?" she asked him bluntly. He studied her pieces. Yes, and not just out of kindness. Diego saw in her something rare, a raw, honest voice, untouched by ego or convention. Her work was full of irony, rage, vulnerability, and fire. They began a relationship that was as electrifying as it was destructive. Frida would later say, "I suffered 2 grave accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar ran me over. The other was Diego." They married in 1929. To outsiders, it made no sense. He was enormous, unfaithful, already legendary. She was fierce, walking with a cane, dressed in bold colors and rebellion. Her parents called it a marriage between an elephant and a dove. But Frida was never a dove. Their bond was volatile, passionate, and artistically profound. Diego encouraged her painting and believed in her fiercely. But he also betrayed her repeatedly, including with her own sister, Christina. Frida was shattered. In response, she took lovers of her own, men and women, rumored to include Leon Trotsky and Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939. A year later, they remarried, on different terms. This time, Frida kept her own money, her home, her autonomy. Their second marriage was not about possession. It was about creative companionship and mutual need. Despite heartbreak, Diego remained a constant, an anchor, a storm, a believer. Together, they were not peaceful, but they were legendary. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York, where he painted massive murals commissioned by powerful institutions. Frida, by contrast, observed the United States with a sharpened political gaze. She was a staunch Mexican nationalist, a communist, and a lover of indigenous traditions. The opulence of America, set against the backdrop of the Great Depression, sickened her. In letters home, she mocked American materialism and obsession with appearances. She missed Mexico's grit, its contradictions, its soul. While Diego painted sweeping visions of class struggle and revolution, Frida painted quieter revolutions, smaller canvases, louder truths. She painted pain. She painted herself. She painted Mexico. It was during this time that her visual style crystallized, surreal, vibrant, brutal, and deeply personal. She didn't just survive her pain. She transformed it. She forced the world to see it. And in doing so, she turned suffering into sacred art. Frida didn't paint herself for vanity. She painted herself to survive. Her identity became her landscape. With her body ravaged by trauma, surgeries, and a failed pregnancy in Detroit, she turned inward, creating a mirror that reflected not perfection, but truth. Her self-portraits were raw, bleeding, fractured, exposed. And yet, her expression was always calm, direct, unapologetic. One of her most searing works, Henry Ford Hospital, shows her lying on a hospital bed, weeping, surrounded by symbols of loss: a fetus, a snail, surgical tools, a fractured pelvis. It wasn't abstract. It was honest, emotional, and unflinching, a canvas that didn't ask for sympathy. It demanded witness. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself in leftist politics. She and Diego welcomed Leon Trotsky into their home during his exile. She wore Tehuana dresses, traditional indigenous garments, not as fashion, but as political and cultural armor. Her identity, her body, her beliefs, they were inseparable. Where Diego painted revolutions on walls, Frida painted the cost. The broken body, the burning mind, the self, always present, always watching. Even in pain, even in exile, she painted not just suffering, but resistance. By the late 1930s, Frida Kahlo had become more than Diego Rivera's wife. She was a force, an artist of stunning originality, whose work radiated with symbolic complexity and cultural pride. Back at La Casa Azul, her sanctuary in Coyoacán, the walls were cobalt blue, the trim golden yellow. Aztec idols stood in her garden. Monkeys roamed freely. The house pulsed with contradiction and color, a living canvas of her imagination. There, surrounded by pre-Columbian relics, ex-votos, books, incense, and mariachi music, Frida painted with renewed fury. Works like the two Fridas revealed her dual identity, colonized and indigenous, torn and whole. It was a portrait of selfhood in conflict, a visual autobiography of heritage, heartbreak, and resilience. In 1939, she exhibited in Paris, earning praise from Picasso, Breton, Kandinsky. But even among surrealists, she stood apart. They thought I was a surrealist, she said. But I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality. Her art pulsed with skeletons, hummingbirds, thorns, hearts, blood, corn, symbols of Mexico's ancient soul and present wounds. But as her creative fire grew, her body continued to deteriorate. Multiple surgeries, infections, chronic agony. She painted from bed, often propped upright in corsets, her fingers stiff with pain. But she refused to stop. By the 1940s, Frida's art had become darker, clearer, and more political. In the broken column, she showed herself split open, nails in her flesh, a shattered ionic column where her spine should be. And yet her eyes, fierce, unflinching, refused pity. Pain was no longer her subject. It was her companion, her antagonist, her muse. Her political voice sharpened, too. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in protests, wrote revolutionary letters. Even when she couldn't walk, she arrived in her wheelchair, fists raised. In 1953, Frida was granted her first solo exhibition in Mexico. Doctors told her she couldn't attend. So she arrived in an ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, placed in the center of the gallery, surrounded by her own work, draped in traditional dress, laughing, drinking tequila, and defying every expectation. Her final paintings were both innocent and profound. In Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, she painted herself cradled by Marx, rejecting capitalism's grip. Her last known painting? A simple still life of watermelons, one slice reading. Viva la vida. Long live life. Even at death's edge, she chose celebration over surrender. On July 13, 1954, at age 47, Frida Kahlo died in the same room where she was born, La Casa Azul. The official cause, pulmonary embolism. But those closest to her whispered it was exhaustion, from surgeries, pain, betrayal, and a body that had fought too long. Just days before her death, she had joined a protest against the CLED coup in Guatemala, fragile, in her wheelchair, fist raised. Revolution was her final act. Her last diary entry was brief, defiant. I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return. Her funeral was held at Palacio de Bellas Arts, Mexico's grandest cultural institution. Her coffin draped in the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party. Her mourners included artists, revolutionaries, lovers, enemies, and Diego Rivera, inconsolable. He called her the greatest love of his life, even as he had nearly broken her. But in the years after her death, something extraordinary happened. Frida Kahlo refused to disappear. At first, her name was whispered, her art too personal, too strange to categorize, too political for surrealists, too surreal for traditionalists. But by the 1970s and 80s, feminists, artists, and activists began to rediscover her. And suddenly, her voice roared. Frida wasn't just an artist. She became a symbol of pain turned into beauty, of revolution born through the body, of Mexican identity, queerness, disability, feminism, and fierce authenticity. Her face, unibrow, flowers, gaze, became iconic. Her home became a museum. Her diary, a sacred text. Her paintings, treasures in the world's greatest collections. She lived much of her life in Diego's shadow. But in death, she eclipsed him. Frida Kahlo didn't just leave behind art. She left a mirror and dared the world to look. Not with pity, not with fear, but with fire. Today, her image is everywhere, on murals, t-shirts, memes, dolls. But her legacy isn't the face. It's the truth behind it. She wasn't flawless. She didn't try to be. She didn't fit in boxes. She burned them. She gave us rawness, rage, contradictions, color, culture, and courage. She turned what made her different into art that now defines generations. Frida Kahlo didn't ask to be a symbol. She simply told the truth. And in doing so, told it for millions who had never seen themselves in art before. Now, when we see her face, we don't just see art. We see rebellion. We see Mexico. We see resistance. We see Frida, not gone, but immortal.